It makes no sense to me that the Ford government has brought this proposal back. I was sort of the first politician to really come out against it.
Welcome to Inside Guelph. You're currently watching the Local Leader segment where we interview a local leader of our community to see what they're doing to keep Guelph uniquely Guelph while making sure our city remains an economic and social leader. Today we got local MPP Mike Schreiner with us, and he's an outspoken advocate for local food, water, small businesses, affordable housing, and mental health. And hey, if you like content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell so next time we do content like this, you'll be notified. And if you can do me one last favor, hit that like button so you can feed that YouTube algorithm and make sure this gets out to more people. All right, without any further ado, let's begin the interview. Hi, Mike. Thanks so much for joining us on Inside Guelph today. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. To kick off, I'd love to ask you some fun icebreakers so people can get to know you a little bit better. Is that okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, awesome. So what was your first job?
You know what? My first job was creating my own business, actually. I'm a serial entrepreneur. And when I was, I don't know, maybe 10 or so, I bought a lawnmower and my dad loaned me the money and charged me interest on it. And I quickly was able to make enough money mowing people's yards and paid back the loan and started putting some money in my piggy bank.
That's really cool. I love that story. That's an amazing story. I love how he charged you interest too. Gave you a taste of the real world. That's amazing.
Yeah, I believe the interest rate was about 12% because it was in the late 70s.
That's amazing.
But by today's standards, that would have probably been seen as gouging.
That's amazing. Can you describe to me your perfect day in Guelph? What's your perfect day look like?
You know what? I had one of those perfect days this weekend where I got up in the morning and went for a run along the river. And then later in the day, my daughter and I paddled the Aramosa River. And in the evening, my wife and I went for a bike ride along the Trans-Canada Trail. And of course, along the way, we ran into people we knew and could wave at a distance, obviously, given the current public health crisis. But to me, that was a perfect day in Guelph.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And what's something people can't find out about you when they Google you?
Yeah, you know, I'm wondering if this is maybe Googleable. You might be able to find this out now because I've said it enough times, but I'm going to continue to go with this answer when I'm asked this type of question, is I'm an avid basketball fan. I love basketball. I'm a season ticket holder for the Guelph Nighthawks, and hopefully we'll be able to restart. I've been a huge Raptors fan from day one, and anybody who knows me well knows that if you want to distract me and get me talking about something else, just ask me a question about basketball.
That's really cool. Well, thanks for sharing those cool tidbits about yourself. I appreciate it. All right, let's dive into some of the questions we have for you today. And to kick off, we're going to talk about the Greenbelt. What are the current threats facing the Greenbelt right now?
Well, you know, I think the biggest threat facing the Greenbelt is the current government has put forward a number of policies that threaten the integrity of the Greenbelt. And probably the one that received the most media attention is gutting the ability of conservation authorities to protect our drinking water and protect us from flooding. And they basically removed the science and evidence-based decision-making that the conservation authorities have and placed most of that power in the hands of the minister, which politicizes all of that. And that's what led to the resignation of most members of the Greenbelt Council. I would say the second biggest threat to the Greenbelt is highway proposals. So the government has two major 400 series highway proposals, Highway 413, which has received a lot of media attention, and less media attention has been focused on the Holland Marsh Highway. But both of those highways would basically pave over parts of the Greenbelt, facilitate sprawl, which is putting pressure on the areas in and around the Greenbelt, and put pressure on the waterways that flow through the Greenbelt. And that really affects the integrity of the Greenbelt in terms of the ability to protect us from flooding, the ability to protect species and habitat, and in some cases threaten some of the farmland that's so vital to growing our food.
Absolutely. Yeah, and obviously you just covered, what those impacts are for what are the impacts for the city of Guelph specifically if we start cutting into the greenbelt like that?
Yeah, well, parts of the Greenbelt protect the headwaters of river systems that feed into Guelph. And as you know, Guelph is, the largest city in Canada that still relies solely on groundwater for our drinking water source. So protecting those headwaters is vital to protecting both the quality and quantity of Guelph's water. And so, and then the other thing for me is, and this isn't necessarily the existing Greenbelt, but there's proposals on the table about expanding the Greenbelt and expanding the Greenbelt to include the Periscott Moraine area, which would help protect Guelph drinking water and just protect some of the recharge areas in the south of Guelph. And the other one is expanding the Greenbelt to include urban river valleys, which could include the Speed and Hermosa rivers, which I think would be a huge benefit to Guelph. Obviously, a big part of our city's identity is our rivers and maintaining, and they also help feed into just recharging water for the region, period. And so, the more we can do to protect the quality and integrity of those rivers, the better it is for Guelph, I think economically, certainly environmentally, but also just in terms of making sure we continue to protect the quality and quantity of Guelph's drinking water.
Absolutely. It doesn't sound like that's something we really want to mess with and is worth fighting for and keeping safe. While we're on this topic, I'm going to actually skip ahead to this one. And looking at the Greenbelt, there was some big news that happened when Norm Sterling was appointed chair to the Greenbelt Council. Do you have any concerns that, given he voted against the Greenbelt creation in 2005?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly concerned that we now have a chair of the Greenbelt Council who voted against the establishment of the Greenbelt.
Right.
But you know what? People can change their mind. I mean, that was a number of years ago. Since then, there's such strong public support for protecting the Greenbelt. I mean, it's almost reached iconic status. And I would say the very first time the Ford government backed down on a policy proposal was they put forward a bill in the fall of 2018, so shortly after they were elected, that would open the Greenbelt for development. And the public backlash was very intense. And I'm proud to say I was the first opposition member to ask a question about that particular legislation and to begin really pushing against it. And a whole citizens movement sprung up saying, stop that bill. And I even saw a lot of signs here in Guelph, which was nice to see. It was a big issue here in Guelph and just really all across the Greater Toronto GTHA. And so the Ford government backtracked because they were under so much pressure. And since then, anytime the government has proposed something like Highway 413 that would run through the Greenbelt and pave over parts of the Greenbelt, there's been strong public opposition. So in many respects, the Greenbelt has achieved iconic status in Ontario. So I think it's going to be very difficult for any government to open the Greenbelt for development. And so, I'm hoping that Mr. Sterling recognizes that, puts forward proposals and ideas that protect the integrity of the Greenbelt. But I'm also concerned because, we had David Crombie, who was a former Conservative cabinet minister, who was the previous chair of the Greenbelt Council, and the Ford government's actions in undermining and threatening the integrity of the Greenbelt led to his resignation and the resignation of a number of other members of the council. So I'm worried that even if the council does put forward strong recommendations, that the Ford government may not even follow them given their track record.
That's interesting. And I mean, it kind of brings up this question here. Do you agree that someone should just be appointed to a role that's so important versus elected by their peers?
Yeah, it's not uncommon for governments to appoint people to these kinds of positions. There is a process within the legislature where not all appointments, but some appointments are reviewed, and certainly this one could fall into that. So I would say, eliminating all government appointments, I think would be very challenging. So that's not as big of an issue to me as making sure the appointment process, and I've actually put forward proposals around this, that the people are qualified for the position, that there's integrity, there's a process that the government would have to follow to ensure the integrity of appointments. And, unfortunately, the government hasn't brought forward those changes to the appointment process. I think that would address some of the concerns that people have about governments, appointing people who are unqualified and who are just being appointed purely for political reasons. And so I would feel much more comfortable with appointments if we had a reformed appointment process that would protect the integrity of appointments.
Well, that just sounds like common sense, right? So, I mean, it should sound like it should change, but I guess we're dealing with what we have at the moment. So, hopefully, you can push some change there. That'd be great. So, switching gears a little bit, switching to Guelph and looking at affordable housing. What are we working on to create more affordable housing here in Guelph?
Yeah, well, first of all, let me just say the housing market, as everybody who lives in Guelph knows, has become increasingly lacking in affordability. And, if you own a home, I guess you're in a fairly good position because the value of your home has gone up substantially. But I can't tell you, back in the days when we could still knock on doors, when I would knock on doors, probably the number one issue people would want to talk about was housing affordability. And that has only become a bigger issue, in the last year or so. And so, there are a number of strategies to address that. One of them is making sure that we increase the supply of housing while protecting farmland. And so what that really means is that we need to start building more, I would argue, denser communities, people-centered communities. I'm a big advocate of just the whole concept around 15-minute cities where you can live and work and access, the services you need, whether it's, groceries or the hardware store or the dry cleaner, restaurants, other amenities within a 15-minute walk or bike ride from your home. And I think if we can start building what I would call human scale density, so, not just choosing between high rises and single family homes, but having a lot more mix. So of course, still having those two options available, but having more human scale and people-centered density, that would enable us to increase the supply of housing without threatening things like farmland and green space. And then I believe government's going to have to play a much bigger role when it comes to addressing more deeply affordable housing efforts. And Guelph is a leader in this. Like, we have a number of supportive housing projects with the goal of eliminating homelessness in Guelph by 2023. And I've been a very strong advocate and supporter of those projects, both working with the mayor and our federal MP and a number of organizations and service providers here in Guelph to put us in a position where we have enough supportive housing to address deeply affordable issues and particularly to provide wraparound services for those individuals who might be experiencing mental health and addictions challenges. So they have not only housing, but have the wraparound supports to make sure they can retain their housing. And then finally, I would say the other part of government involvement is creating more incentives for affordable rental housing. And governments have sort of gotten out of the social and co-op housing game over the last couple decades. And I think we need both the federal and provincial levels of government to begin investing more in things like social housing, affordable rental housing, and co-op housing, which provides affordable housing options for a wider spectrum of people.
And how do we start initiating those changes? Like, what has to be done to actually make those investments?
Well, you're starting to see some of those investments being made through the federal government with the National Housing Strategy. Locally, both the Mayor's Task Force in homelessness, the cooperation that's happening between the city and the county is very positive. And, the one thing that we really need is the provincial government now to step up. I was disappointed in the most recent provincial budget because it really didn't talk about housing affordability at all. And I see, outside of the immediate public health crisis that we're facing, housing affordability is probably the number one issue that people are facing. And we need the provincial government to be a partner at the table. So, I'll be, if I put my, leader of the Green Party hat on, we've been working with stakeholders across the political spectrum, and including the Ontario Real Estate Association, home builders, anti-poverty activists, nonprofit, for-profit housing providers, to come up with a comprehensive plan around how the province can incentivize and facilitate housing affordability across the spectrum. So, seniors who want to downsize, young families who want to upsize, young folks who want to purchase their first house, people who need to access affordable rental housing. It's going to take a comprehensive approach because there's a continuum of housing needs. And so, I think we're seeing some encouraging signs from the federal government and locally. And now, it's going to be my job to keep pushing for change at the provincial level.
Amazing. Absolutely. And while we're on this topic a little bit here, I think the Guelph Innovation District is an opportunity to offer some more supply of housing. What do you want to see happen with this Guelph Innovation District?
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how the province handles the sale of those lands. Obviously, as many of you who follow the local news know that there was announced that there was a buyer, and then the buyer was withdrawn, and it's been taken off the market. But I think the city's vision for the Guelph Innovation District is very exciting. I mean, to have a community that is going to be live and work and creates a vision for how we can attract business investment and job creation in innovative fields, technology, green technology, clean tech, respecting the natural area and natural spaces. The opportunity to build a community that fits under the guidelines of, a 15-minute city, which we just previously discussed, making sure there's good transit and other transportation option nodes, from the GID lands into downtown Guelph, for example. I think there's some real opportunities to build a very exciting community there. And my hope is that it would actually be a net zero community as well, which would fit in with the Guelph's commitment to being carbon neutral by 2050, and could create, an example for the rest of the province of how you can design a neighborhood that is a great place to live and work and play, and also is built in a way that addresses our needs to combat the climate crisis and creates affordable places for people to live, both in terms of housing affordability, but also in terms of the energy costs of heating homes and businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I was interviewing the mayor, it sounds like there's a lot of excitement around this project, and the fact that it's slowing down, I think, is frustrating on multiple levels. So hopefully we can find a way to speed this up and get this to market and actually create this vision that we all want to see happen. So that'd be really great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would say one thing is it's better to take the time to get it right than not, because we're as you know, that part of Guelph and the Clare-Maltby area are sort of last two areas for green space development in Guelph. And I think it's really important to make sure we get those right, and it fits in to the vision that we have for Guelph, over the next number of decades.
Absolutely. Switching gears to transit a little bit here. We're talking about the Highway 413. Where does that currently stand?
Yeah, so right now, the federal government has stepped in and is doing an environmental assessment on it. I think the Ford government should just shelve the project. I mean, to me, it makes absolutely no sense to spend $6 to $10 billion on a highway that's going to pave over 2,000 acres of prime farmland and 400 acres of greenbelt lands, only to save people 30 seconds on their commute. There are far better things we could spend $10 billion on, one being regional transit. And then the other thing it'll do is it's just going to facilitate sprawl at a time when, the biggest driver of climate pollution in Ontario right now is land use development and sprawl, which then creates, the need for people to have to commute by car. And we've seen, we have about 75 years of data now that when you build new highways, it relieves gridlock for a year or two, and then it's just gridlocked again because of the sprawl that it unleashes. And then that will increase risks for us from flooding, for example, put more pressure on the fact that we would lose more wetlands, put more pressure on our waterways, which affects the quality and quantity of our drinking water. So there are so many reasons that an expert panel just a few years ago recommended canceling the 413 because the cost far outweighed the benefits. And so it makes no sense to me that the Ford government has brought this proposal back. And I remember last summer, I was sort of the first politician at Queen's Park to really come out against it. And, at that time we could still do some outdoor news conferences and things like that. And so last summer I was doing some news conferences against the highway along the proposed route. And I remember a local mayor who was against the highway saying to me, it's like, Mike, it is great you're speaking out against this, but there is no way you're going to stop this highway. And here we are, 10 months later, and a number of municipalities and regional councils have come out against the highway. Even a number that initially supported it have either come out against it or have called for the federal environmental assessment. And there's this whole citizens movement that's come out against it. And to me, it just shows you that if you put forward ideas that make sense and you can engage people around those ideas and a citizens movement builds up against it, that, the powerful voice that people have, if they're organized and speak out against something that makes absolutely no sense, you can really build a movement against it. And so, what I would call on the Ford government now is save us all a bunch of time, energy, and money, and just shelve the project rather than forcing us to go through a federal environmental assessment.
Absolutely. And, it sounds, based on what I'm hearing here, it sounds like a Band-Aid solution that's not really going to be a solution at all in the short term. So going back to the drawing table and rethinking things might seem to make sense here. Let's talk about the GO line from Toronto to Cambridge. What will this impact the two-way all-day GO train to Guelph?
Yeah, so to me, it will only enhance that proposal. And so I've been a big supporter of GO expansion throughout the entire region. One of my top priorities is making sure we have all-day two-way GO along the Kitchener line, Guelph, which includes Guelph, and it was good to see in the budget that was that funding was allocated for it. The government's made some recent announcements, and so I think that's a good news story. Having a GO line to Cambridge is another good news story, and then the one thing I would say that is missing from the government's proposal is better intercity bus connections as well. So yes, we need rail lines, but we also need intercity bus connections. And in particularly when I think of Guelph and Cambridge, but also Guelph to KW, Guelph to Hamilton. And what's beneficial about regional bus service is it's something that you can implement very quickly. Like you can get buses on the road very quickly, whereas rail transport takes a bit longer. And I can tell you there are a number of people who particularly commute from Guelph to KW, Guelph to Cambridge, Guelph to Hamilton, who need bus access right now and need commuter access right now. And especially with, the unfortunate announcement of Greyhound closing, I think the province is going to have to really step in and support both public investment and supporting private coach companies to fill in the gaps and to expand of inter-regional bus service, but to also expand the service as well. So that's something that is really missing in the current government's transit plans, and something I'm going to continue to keep pushing them on.
Absolutely, yeah. People need to get around, and they need to be able to get around affordably. So that's key. What is your opinion on the ministerial zoning orders? Do they have a place in our province, or are they just undermining the provincial planning legislation?
Yeah, so MZOs certainly have a place in the province, but they have to be used responsibly. And the unfortunate reality is the current government is misusing and abusing MZOs. And just, two quick examples. One that I played a very strong role in opposing was an MZO on the Duffins Creek wetland to build an Amazon warehouse. And again, an example of, being one of the first politician to speak out against it, ask the government tough questions on it, and to work with building a citizens movement against it, which then included other opposition parties as well. And finally, to the point where, Amazon said, hey, okay, we are not going to build a warehouse on this wetland. And then the developer said, hey, we don't want it. And now the city's even come and said, hey, government, I guess we were wrong to ask you for that ministerial zoning order. It shows you what can happen if they're misused and used inappropriately. And the government went to extraordinary lengths, even saying that a minister can issue a ministerial zoning order that violates all local and provincial planning laws, all trying to get this Amazon warehouse built on a provincially significant wetland. And just to put that in context for people is we have lost 75% of our wetlands in Southern Ontario. We know that the biggest climate risk in Southern Ontario is flooding. Wetlands play a vital role in protecting us against flooding and in filtering and cleaning our drinking water. If we pave over more wetlands, we are going to pay the cost in flood risk. And the average flooded basement costs a homeowner $43,000. And so for the government to, strip conservation authorities of their ability to protect us from flooding, start using MZOs that violate local and provincial planning laws, subjects us to significant risk. And one of those risks is flooding. The other MZO that got a lot of pushback, which will be a familiar story here in Guelph, was the glass factory that was turned down in Guelph, Hermosa, received a ministerial zoning order to be built in Stratford. And citizens in Stratford, much like in Guelph, Wellington, rose up and said, whoa, we don't want this factory that's going to use up so much of our local drinking water to be built here. And we can't believe the government is doing an in run around local planning laws to build it. And so that one has now been revoked as well. And so but there are cases where ministerial zoning orders make sense. Famous case in Elliott Lake when we had the mall collapse and the community needed a grocery store built. A ministerial zoning order was issued to facilitate the building of a local grocery store. The previous government used a ministerial zoning order to halt a quarry proposal that would have blown a hole in the Niagara Escarpment in the Greenbelt and affected drinking water supply. And so here's the bottom line is if you're going to use a ministerial zoning order, it needs to be an MZO that abides by local and provincial planning laws. And there's a public interest in speeding up the development process that is in compliance with local and provincial planning laws. And some examples of that could be, we desperately need long-term care homes, or, we desperately need affordable housing projects. So there are instances where a ministerial zoning order is appropriate. Maybe we need protection from something that's threatening drinking water, for example. I mean, I can come up with a number of examples, but they have to be in compliance with local and provincial planning laws, and they need to have widespread local support. And so they should be used rarely, but there are times when it's an appropriate use. The problem with the current government is they've actually brought in legislation that gives the minister, one person, the power to issue an MZO that violates provincial and local planning laws. And I think that's one, it's undemocratic, and two, it is highly risky. Building in inappropriate places and subjecting things to enhanced flood risk is just one of a number of examples of how that process, if it is in violation of planning laws, which we have there for a reason, to protect people, communities, our economy, our environment, our drinking water, etc., then it's an inappropriate use of an MZO. And the fact that the government has given itself the power to circumvent planning laws and issue MZOs, I think is very dangerous.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It sounds like there's a lot of important things that could be damaged by misuse of that. And there's a lot of power there. So, I mean, hopefully the people that we've trusted to run the government is going to do what's right for the people and the citizens of our cities. So, Mike, I really appreciate all this information. I know I've learned a lot. Sometimes it's hard to find all this information, and I really appreciate you taking the time and enlightening us with this. Is there anything else you wanted to add while I have you here?
Well, I would just say that, one, thank you for inviting me to be on. And two, Guelph is such a great place to live. And we're so fortunate to live in a community that is a great place to live, has such a strong economy, and is a community where people really come together and work together. And I know over the last 15 months during this public health crisis, all three levels of government, the private sector, the public sector, social service agencies, our public health unit, have really all come together in a pretty inspiring way to work cooperatively and collaboratively as a community. And I've found that inspiring and also very heartwarming that we live in such a caring community.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely. Well, Mike, thanks again for jumping on with us. I hope we can have you back sometime again in the future. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure, Steve. Have a great day.
You too. All right, I hope you loved that interview with Mike Schreiner, our local MPP. And hey, if you like content like this, as a reminder to hit that subscribe button and notification bell so the next time we put out content like this, you'll be notified. And hey, if you wouldn't mind hitting that like button, that'll really go a long way making sure this video gets seen by more people because the YouTube algorithm loves that. All right, guys, thanks again, and we'll see you next time.